Once again, this episode is being brought to you by dieselfuelprints.com. Diesel Fuel Prints has been in the sticker business since 1991, and they've been printing all of my stickers since the early 2000s. Dieselfuelprints.com has easy online ordering and quotes for stickers of any size and shape. Full color printing on the highest quality weatherproof material, and 125 black and white stickers starts at $25. Shipping's always free, and listeners of this show can get 10% off when they use the promo code AWP 2021. So go check out Diesel Fuel Prints for your sticker needs. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Anyway Whatever podcast. As always, I'm your host, Mike Fisher, and today's guest is artist, illustrator, Garrett Smith. Me and Dylan do a lot of work in a similar style and genre of extreme underground metal and punk rock music. We have a number of friends in the art community, and it was another one of those times where it was like, how do we not know each other? We have so many friends in common. It was really great to sit and talk with Dylan. His work is phenomenal. I will have a link down below to all of his social media. Make sure you follow him on Instagram and on TikTok. His TikTok is really amazing. You get a little glimpse of who he is as a person, and it's always very funny, entertaining, or informational. So yeah, as always, you can also find all the information for my show down below. You can subscribe on Patreon. We've got merch, and I always appreciate all of the support everybody gives me. Always trying to get you to the episode as quickly as I possibly can. So here we go. Garrett Smith. Great episode. Cool dude. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Anyway Whatever podcast. Today's guest, as I said up front, is Garrett Smith, and he is an illustrator. And I don't know how you necessarily feel about this, but you're a little bit of an online personality as well. I found you initially through your TikTok. I started following you on TikTok, and then once I went over and found you on Instagram, I was like, "Oh, holy shit! Like we have a bunch of friends, we have a bunch of mutual friends." And then I never reached out to you, but I had you on the list of people I wanted to have on the podcast. And then you messaged me and you're like, "Man, I found your podcast. I've been listening to it. It's crazy how many people we know." It was like literally have it. And, which is not an uncommon theme for me on this podcast, is I'll be talking to somebody and I'll be like, "Oh, wow. Okay. How did we never know each other before?" But yeah, we were just talking in the lead up, and you said that you are like, it's been like 4 years. You've been a full-time, freelance artist. That's amazing, dude.
Yeah, it's been a blast. For a while before that, I was still grinding and had a serious, capital D design job. And, eventually I was just like, you know what, I would much rather be doing this for myself.
Yeah, totally. What kind of stuff did you do in your day gig when you were doing it design wise?
So it's funny because when I was doing that job, I never talked about it with like anyone ever. But I was a graphic designer and proposal developer for Clear Channel in the airports division. So I was designing airport advertising programs for the top 50 airports in North America.
That's awesome.
That's
awesome.
Yeah. So I was doing that like during the day, and, going to that job, putting on my headphones, like listening to podcasts and just doing all of that work, like grinding through it, and, in secret, emailing Braun from Mastodon about designs, and John Dyer Baisley about stuff for Baroness, and no one in the office really knew what I did outside of there. And it was just really funny, kind of like weird double life for a little bit, until they actually figured that out.
Dude, I did the same thing. I was in video games for like 15 years, and at one point when the internet boom happened, I took a job at this company that was doing this new thing called adver games, where we would make games for major corporations to put on their website to, advertise new products that they had. But little did we know that what we were really making was a way for them to harvest data. This was like one of the first companies that pioneered data harvesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then once we all figured it out, we were like, fuck this place. But it was like every day it was like, I'm just like a skate punk guy. And like, I'm going to work every day with like some of the people who were the founders of the company or investors in the company were like, fucking people who worked at, News Corp before they came over to there. It was like big deal, millionaire families. And it was totally crazy. And it was like, I fit in like a fucking square peg.
I understand. I mean, I would go to that job after a while, like once I realized, like what I was into outside of work, I was like, all right, cool. Like I don't have to keep this facade up, right? Of like the collared shirt tie thing. Like you guys know what I'm into. Okay, perfect. So I was just like, I'm just gonna be me, since y'all already know. There's no point in like lying anymore. And it was really funny being me, looking like me in a boardroom of like 20 people in suits, and they have to listen to what I have to say.
Oh, I've been there.
I really enjoyed that. I'm not, for the little bit that was happening, I really enjoyed that they had to take me seriously.
Dude, I have totally been in that exact same situation. But one of the things that was funny is like I would get so super annoyed by like all the buzzword talk, like, this needs to be viral, and we really need to have some stickiness to this. And if the optics aren't, and it would make me insane to the point where I would start getting like a little too aggressive with how I talk to people. And eventually my bosses were like, okay, you're not in these meetings anymore.
Everything needs to pop and be synergized.
Oh God, dude, I hated. And then it was even worse because it's in LA, right? And at the time I'm like raising my family, and I'm like living in like West Hills, way out in the West Valley. And I have to drive down to Century City every day, 101, 405, back and forth. So 3 hours at least of my day are commuting, on top of like 10 hours a day of work. It was like the most miserable 3 years of my life. Like, I don't know how I managed to live through it.
Like 15 miles, 20 miles?
Yeah, like 20 miles, like hour and a half each direction. No problem. No problem at all. But at the same time, I was like making enough money. I was like, I'm going to buy myself a fucking cool lowrider pickup truck. I'm going to put a sick ass stereo in it. And then I just listened to death metal back and forth. So I didn't kill anybody.
Yep. And putting bucks away, making that escape pod, right?
Yeah, it took a while. It took me getting divorced and my kids becoming, 18 and to the point where nobody needed to rely on me making 6-figure income anymore. It was like all right happening when I met my current wife. And so she's like, oh, you have this like video game job. I'm like, I got it for about 6 more months. And then you better get ready for me working out of the house, drawing skulls all day.
Right. Yep.
Because I'm not going back anymore.
I don't blame you. No, it's definitely a grind.
Yeah, for sure. So you're to get people who are listening who may not be familiar with the work up to speed a little bit. You tend to work for, it looks like you tend to work for a lot of like grind bands and black metal bands and crust type bands. Your work primarily that you put online is primarily black and white work.
Yeah. So like also like it's funny, a lot of doom and stoner bands, even though I've never been a stoner.
Me neither. Like stoner metal it's the genre where if you like, I like so many genres, pretty much all the underground genres. Like I like jazz music. I like, funk music. I like all kinds of stuff. But if you sat me down and were like, Mike, you can only pick one, it's gonna be stoner metal probably for me, and I don't smoke weed. I probably smoked weed like 5 times in my life.
And for and it's funny for me, it would be like that cross section between like anarcho punk and death rock, like Rudimentary Peni. Like,
Yep.
oh, that is my fucking shit.
Yeah, well, looking at your work, like, this, I can see where, Nick from Rudimentary Peanut would have been like a massive influence on your work for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. And it was funny too because like I didn't even get into Rudimentary Peanut until I was like in my early 20s, I think. Like it wasn't even one of those bands that I was like, into in high school and like found really early on. A friend of mine had just mentioned them, and I was like, oh, like I don't think I ever messed with them. And he was like, wait, what? And he was like, dude, like he's like, before you even hear this, I know it's going to be your favorite band. It's funny because he gave me Death Church, and he was like, you can't have it, but you can borrow this. He's like, I need it back. He was like, but check this out. And honestly, it's, it immediately became like my favorite punk record of all time. I was like, God, this is so good.
Yeah, the musically they were not my thing. A lot of that 80s, like I was saying before, like I'm older, so I kind of grew up in the 80s hardcore punk scene. Anybody who listens to this podcast knows that about me. And so there was a lot of the British anarcho stuff that visually I really loved, but musically I did not so much. Like Discharge, GBH, like Conflict, those like the crustier, more kind of heavy stuff I liked a lot. Discharge, of course, probably one of my, probably top 10 favorite bands ever. But some of like the weirder, more esoteric shit, I never got into Crass. I always loved Crass's visuals. I always loved, Rudimentary Peanut. Subhumans, I never really got into Subhumans. But I do appreciate all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I do love all of the things that that it spawned after, like bands like Nausea and stuff like that came directly on the heels of it. So yeah, I totally get why people love it, but Rudimentary Peanut is musically not, I didn't really connect.
I totally get it. It's definitely like I don't want to say an acquired taste, but I feel like it's like very specific, like it's polarizing. You're either all about it, or you're like, this just ain't me.
Yeah, it is a very it's a unique sound that Rudimentary has, and it goes along with a lot of that, kind of crass stuff
Totally.
of that time. And but yeah, I totally get it. I get why people are into it. And then you ended up with bands like Dystopia and all that kind of stuff, Amoebics and although I never got into Amoebics either for some reason. Like everybody loves Amoebics, and I'm like, I don't know, I don't hear it.
I like some Amoebics a lot more than others. Like that, like early, like Lardactyl, is super gnarly. But kind of like the newer stuff, and like, what was the other? Is it Tapcross? I don't remember what the newer band was. Like some of my friends are super into that band, and for me, it just like never clicked.
Like everybody is.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, it's cool. You're into it. That's neat.
Yeah, you know what? I at this point in my life, like I certainly, like the last thing I'm going to do is judge other people's music tastes. Like I don't know. I don't. I always hope that my opinions on music, my personal opinions on music, don't make people feel uncomfortable about their opinion on music. Because I think sometimes people like take personal offense that you don't like their favorite band or whatever, and it's like that's one of the weirdest things to me. But
no, but like okay, but like, have you listened to like this record? You're just like, listen,
every fucking time, every fucking time. Well, you have to listen to this record, and it's like, dude. And it's funny. Completely and totally separate genre of music. The single worst people on earth for that are Zappa fans. Frank Zappa fans are like, well, you obviously didn't listen to this or that. And I'm like, no, fuck, I've listened to a bunch of it. Like, I love Frank Zappa. He's one of the greatest human beings who's ever lived. I agree with almost every fucking thing he says, but I don't like his music, man. Like, come on.
I get it. But so you were saying like just a little bit ago how like, you like pretty much just genres across the board.
Yeah, the older I get, when I was in my 30s, it was like if it was not death metal, grind, black metal, or hardcore punk, I was not gonna be interested in whatever it was you had for me.
Yeah, like when I was in, like my like teenage years, like early 20s, I was just like, like if it's not this, or that, I'm like not about it. And it's funny because like, like I turned 33 this year and I realized that in the last probably like 5 years, I'm like, oh, I really love pop. Like I really love it. Like Carly Rae Jepsen and like Lana Del Rey and like Doja Cat. Like I'm like, oh, I love this. This is so good.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that I actually listen to. I listen to the band Cannons a lot. It's
Okay.
like perfect wake up in the morning, making my breakfast while I'm getting my day going. On the days that I don't feel like listening to, fucking
Yeah.
Conan or something. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
but yeah, like the older I've gotten, it's like at some point there were bands that I had heard over the course of my life who I didn't pay attention to because they weren't, a particular genre or whatever. A band like say like the Meters, who are like a funk band from New Orleans. And like, I would know their songs from like a Quentin Tarantino movie or whatever. And then when I really started, and fuck Spotify,
Right.
but I listen to all my music on Spotify.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah.
I actually just yesterday was recording an episode with Esmond from the band Monolord. And we had this same conversation about fuck Spotify. But so once I started like, me and my wife lived in Echo Park for like 8 years. And then when it was time to buy a house, we came back out here to the Valley where I raised my family. And, I converted the double car garage into like the ultimate art studio. And so I was out here working all the time. So I just had Spotify going all the time. And it was like, I started listening to the Meters like all the time. And then like the thing that's really specifically great about Spotify is if you turn on like the radio of a specific band, you'll get 50 other bands just like them or similar enough. And it's like, like the last 5 years, like, I started listening to jazz music, like, like Miles Davis and stuff. I never listened to that shit when I was, ever.
Yeah.
Just, it's weird. I don't know if it's an age thing or if it's if it's part of the time we're living in. But I don't know. I'm not mad.
No, totally. I mean, like maybe both, right? It's funny, like when I was in art school, I felt like I was like one of only like a small handful of punks there. And it, when I was a teenager, like I thought that it was just going to be like everybody was like a punk kid or a goth kid or like emo, and then I got there and I was like, oh, none of y'all are? Like, oh, okay. And I was like, okay, well, what are you, like, what are you listening to? And it's like, oh, like Arcade Fire and Miles Davis. And I was like, all right, I mean, throw them, like, let's hear it. I was like, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I can never do Arcade Fire. But there are some of those other indie rock bands that I ignored that like I came back to, again, thing that's a lot of my guests are from like the rock poster scene. And so, through the 2000s, I was aware of every single band because I was following the rock poster scene so much. You just see bands for any posters for any touring band. So there were all these bands that I knew the name of, and I was like, yeah, probably not for me. It's like some indie rock stuff. And then I've like come back around to a lot of that stuff where I'm like,
right.
Oh, this is actually really fucking awesome.
There's also like a bunch of bands that commission some of like the best art. And like, I will probably never listen to that band more than just checking them out because it's just not my thing.
Sure.
But the art that they commission for their posters, just absolutely brilliant.
Have you ever done many screen printed rock posters?
So not a whole lot of like, like big official posters, like even though I was friends with, a lot of those artists and knew of a lot of those bands and kind of was in like the tertiary scene kind of surrounding it. I think that like when that started to really come up, I was just a little bit young and kind of like figuring things out. Like I was at that time, I was still drawing all my separations by hand and stuff. So even though I like appreciated it, was like talking with a lot of artists, became friends with like a lot of those artists, like I wasn't really involved in like that scene a whole lot. And the posters that I did do were mostly for, you know, like gnarly punk bands or venues that had like a lot of like, you know, punk and metal shows and like that kind of thing. So nothing on like, you know, I wasn't doing anything for 311, you know?
Yeah. I you know, sometimes I talk to people who are my peers, but they're also like my kids' age. And so like I forget that sometimes, you know, it's like I was talking to this guy who's a drummer in a band and he was talking about how much he loved Nirvana's Nevermind. And it was like, you know, having a conversation with him about it until I had this realization. I was like, oh, he was like 2 when that record was made. And I was like 25, you know, it was like, I was like 23. So it was like prime. And it's like, you know, so I totally get that. Like when the gig poster scene was huge, you were like 17.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's funny because I was still following it, you know, like I was lurking the threads on gig posters like crazy, just like looking at everybody's stuff. And
oh, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, but it was funny, like I like never posted, never like, but would like, you know, be reading all of the back and forth between, you know, just everybody. And it was just like, oh, like this guy seems cool. He's always got good stuff to say. Like this dude's art is killer, but man, what an asshole.
You just summed up gigposters.com like in like 2 sentences.
I mean, it was like, what an incredible archive, right?
It's gone now. It's completely gone. It's like, which seems impossible. Like there has to be data backups from server. There has to be some version of it, but apparently there's not. And if there is, the owner Clay doesn't want it to live.
Yeah, and then like from there, you know, like OMG posters.
Yeah, I don't know that.
So OMG was, you know, the kind of like forum where everybody was just like, you know, sending all their stuff in, and everybody was getting posted on there, and people were like really excited, you know.
Huh. Yeah, I didn't know nothing about that. Once I got off of gigposters.com and like went on to Facebook, and I realized that I could curate my own experience and I didn't have to have a message board that was, you know, infiltrated by every other person on earth. And I could like not have to see posts from like the 5 people I didn't ever want to see posts from. And I was like, well, I'll just do Facebook, I guess then.
Yeah. No, totally. Were you ever on espresso beans?
All my work is on espresso beans, but the site was always so slow and like it kind of catered to more of like the hippie scene that was totally not my thing at all. Yeah. Lots of great work came out of that stuff, but it seemed like it was for the generation before and like, you know, jam band, like Grateful Dead, you know, people. And I all my work's there. I always appreciated that it kept track of like the value of what your work was selling for, which was kind of interesting. Every now and then I'll still go back and I'll be like, oh, like I wonder if I have anything that's like worth anything.
Yeah, I checked that out for like a hot minute. It was like, you know, hanging out in those forums a little tiny bit, but yeah, those days of like gig posters was so sick.
That's amazing that you were like, because you know this conversation we're having right now that's new information for me, that you were like a lurker there with so many people that guests that I have on and friends that are important people in my life that you know kind of came from that. That's awesome to hear. Somebody who didn't post there but read everything as a teenager. That's awesome, man. That's just
like, you know, like picking up like a hardcore record, picking up, you know, a punk record or like whatever, and seeing, you know, Paul Romano and Alan Forbes and, you know, some of these, you know, some of my favorite artists that were doing all of these phenomenal, just gorgeous covers for these records. And being like, oh, my work is not there yet. Like, I am not ready to share that to like the larger world just yet. But let me see what these, what people are like working on, what people are doing, and like stumbled across that. And, by the time that I felt, comfortable and good about like releasing my own work, gig posters was kind of fun though.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't there yet either, and I wasn't good enough to be doing it, but I'm the type of asshole who doesn't care. Like, I figured out when I was
out there, right?
When I was a teenager in the 80s and I wanted to do stuff for punk rock bands, like a lot of teenagers, and in particular a lot of, artistic, people when they're young, even, just artistic people in general, I was like super introverted, and but I realized, like, if I'm going to sing in a band, if I'm going to contact bands about using my artwork, all the things I want to do, I can't be an introvert. I'll never get off the dock. And so I just decided to pretend always that I could do it. And so I just started doing that. And then so it was like, I just fooled myself always into just being like, just, if you don't go, you're never, ever going to go. So just keep going. And, 20, 30 years later, 35 years later, look, here I am.
No, absolutely. I feel like, when I was really young, I feel like I was like way more outgoing. I was, very, I was like willing to talk to people, willing to like, reach out, willing to, whatever. And then at some point, probably in like my teenage years, that just tanked and didn't pick back up until maybe, like 23, 24, when I realized the same thing. I was just like, all right, you know what? Like, fuck it. If I want to do the things that I want to do, I'm going to need to, not be in this show, actually like leave my house, talk to people, go to art shows, talk about like my work, be comfortable putting my work and myself out there.
Yep.
And, now I don't think that a lot of people would describe me as introverted, other than
me neither.
Yeah, like, like
kind of hard to have a podcast and be an introvert.
Right, like my partner's probably like this dude never shuts the fuck up.
I know that my wife has that problem with me too. She's like, okay, dude, enough.
Yeah.
To talk a little bit about, we were chit-chatting before we started recording a little bit, and the work that you primarily have online on your Instagram and a little bit on your TikTok is like the black and white work, and I'm guessing it's all mixed media, ink, pencil, charcoal, graphite, all different types of stuff, because there's a lot of textures in there. At first I thought it was just ink until I started looking closer. I was like, no, he's got more stuff going on here.
Yeah, so I illustrate directly onto black paper, using white chalk lead, black ink, and occasionally ashes.
Okay.
And from there, kind of building texture, pulling things forward, pushing things back, and just kind of building up that as much as I can for actually illustrating the highlights. I realized from drawing the separations by hand for all of these t-shirts for these punk bands, where they all have to be black shirts, right? So everything that you're illustrating was always black ink on acetate that is actually going to be white. Mm-hmm. So I was already drawing kind of in the negative, essentially. And at a certain point, I realized when I would illustrate directly on the black paper using light or white media, that it just made so much more sense to my brain. Mm-hmm. And the second that I realized that, I was just like, oh shit. And it was like a complete game changer for me. I was like, I can work faster. I can work more efficiently. I understand, how this works, what works, how to build up those, that light, how to like leave things dark. And honestly, like it completely changed my perspective on art making, and it made things easier to make too.
That's
That's
killer.
killer.
I love that you, because I wasn't aware that that's how you worked, and it makes perfect sense. And that is not an easy thing to do, because I also do a lot of stuff for black t-shirts, and the times that I've been like, how am I gonna, is this easier for me to do in white on black? I just I can never really make it happen. So I'm like super impressed that that's how you work. And that's, I mean, yeah, I love hearing shit like that where people kind of figure out how to do the thing they're going to do. It also makes perfect sense that your stuff has such a black metal feel to it, because like that's, you know, the original kind of wave of like, you know, Dark Throne and Mayhem and those bands, like super low budget, lo-fi printing capabilities. It was like, it was always white ink, like super sparse white ink designs on black shirts. And your work has that feel, but it also has the amount of detail of like, you know, somebody like John Dyer Baisley or Pusset or somebody like that. Yeah, that's awesome, dude. I love that shit. Like, what is it? Black paper always seems to have like a heavier weight. Is there a particular paper you use?
Yeah. So I really love Stonehenge Black. It has a great tooth to it. It's got a nice weight to it. You know, it feels good. You can really like load it up with ink and it'll still be pretty good.
Oh, nice.
And being that, you know, kind of like light and texture has always been something that really just I've always been drawn towards. Just allowing the paper's tooth to come through, allowing the chalk on the paper to kind of like do its thing, like just allowing the media to do the work for you is, I mean, yeah, it feels good as you're doing, like as I'm doing it, I can be like, oh yeah, this feels good.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. Cause like when I paint, I don't like painting on panels. I always prefer a canvas because it has some tooth to it. And so like if I do anything like on a skateboard deck, it's always like I don't like this surface. There's no texture here. Like so I totally feel you on that.
What's funny though is for painting, I'm the exact opposite.
Really?
For some reason, like I love painting on a panel, and I can't stand the feel of like canvas and the brush, like that art feel. Like I don't know, like, you know, comparing it to like mouth feel of like, you know, food or something. I'm just like, oh no, get it. I can't.
Dude, I feel you.
But that's really funny that you're like drawn towards that, and I'm like, oh god, I can't.
That's like, you know, we're weirdos, us people who who sit around all day and pull ideas from nowhere out of our brains. Like, you know, it's not that strange that we would be quirky in that way, you know?
No, totally. are super specific, you know, like
dude, like to the point of, I know artists who are so specific about stuff that they you know, only do things one way ever. Oh, yeah. And it's like, I mean, I think I was saying, like, you know, like I have such an ADD person that, like, you know, I'm like, you know, I'm painting, you know, like I'm doing a painting, I'm designing a t-shirt, I'm designing a poster, I'm custom airbrushing an ice hockey goalie mask, I am, you know, whatever it is, I'm working on an album cover. Like I do so many different types of art projects that like I could never just do things one way. Like, I don't know. Like,
yeah,
more power to anybody who works however they work. Like, I'm definitely not going to judge anybody. Like, however you do your thing, that's fucking rad by me. I'm just happy that you're doing it, you know?
No, yeah, totally.
Now, so the second part of my question, based on our conversation, was, do you do color work?
Yeah, so I do, but the majority of the work that I do with color is digitally colored after.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly just because I really enjoy the look and feel of how my black and white illustrations come out, um, and then can color them digitally. And I've done some color stuff for Baroness and um, there were colors for the Mastodon stuff, but still pretty just like like two colors basic, like whatever. But recently did some stuff for Bellertalk, and those dudes love wild color combinations and bright punchy. So I was like, all right, I get to have some fun with this one. And going back to what you were saying earlier about like kind of like the lo-fi black and white you know budget restrictive a bigger band like Bellertalk, like they can do like a 6-color shirt and they're like, hell yeah, we love this. Whereas a lot of punk bands, even the bigger bands, just need everything to be affordable and quick, easy.
Yeah, and then it ends up being part of the aesthetic, right? The lo-fi becomes the aesthetic as well, and that's a whole different thing.
Totally.
Um, but yeah, it's funny. Like a couple little personal comments about that. Like I did a Rob Zombie shirt where
Uh-huh.
they told me I could have as many colors as I want. I did a fucking 18 color shirt for Rob Zombie. I was like, yes, like the only time in my life I ever got that. Um, and then on a funny personal note, like there are three bands that I have never done work for that every other artist who does the type of stuff we do has done work for, and
Uh-huh.
that is Baroness, Macedon, and fucking Pig Destroyer. Like it's the three band, and it's like there's
Yeah.
no reason. Like my
Right.
work fits right in with everything all everybody else does with them, but
I've wanted to work for Pig Destroyer for so long. And it's funny because like those dudes and the band follow me. And I'm like, come on, come on.
yeah. I had Ron Martinez on, who's their tour manager, and he's like, tell me what if you want to, and I'll set it up. And I was like, I haven't because I've been busy, but I'm going to because I mean, fucking Pig Destroyer, man. Like one of my, I mean,
Yeah.
when again, if you listen to grindcore, they need to be in your list. And then like,
And their art has
massive,
always been fantastic.
yeah. I mean, they never lose ever on artwork. It's the same thing with Macedon, and it's like, like their tour manager is one of my really good friends, and
Mhm.
like it's like a one phone call problem to solve, and I never have done it, and
Yeah.
me and my wife were just at Psycho Vegas, a few weeks ago, and
Okay.
got to actually see Pig Destroyer and Mastodon that weekend, which
Well,
was fucking awesome. Two totally different experiences.
yeah.
I saw one of Mastodon's very first ever sets live at a Milwaukee Metal Fest in the 2000s. Like when it was like in their first like 6 months they were a band,
I love it.
and like nobody knew who they were yet, and they were on the Relapse stage, and it was like that Relapse stage was fucking ridiculous. It was like Bongzilla and Nasum and Phobia, fucking like every
Yeah.
insanely great. And then like there's this band Mastodon, and I was like, I'll check them out, and it was before Remission. It was just like fuck,
Yeah.
and yeah, they're one of those bands that like, I don't really care what they do, they always do something that I like. And so
Yeah.
like I've just been a fan since day one. I'm looking forward to the new record. The first single was really great.
Yeah. And the art that Paul did is absolutely fucking killer.
Who did the art? I don't think I've seen the cover yet.
So Paul Romano, who did like the first 6 for them,
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. His work's
he came
amazing.
back to do he came back to do the most recent, and like it's absolutely killer. Just
Yeah.
gorgeous work.
His work's amazing. It's
I'm
so,
saying.
it, nobody else does anything quite like it.
I completely agree. His show, it was funny because Paul's always been like my favorite artist, and him and
I
I
can
became,
see that.
yeah, I mean, his work just blows me away. And we became friends a bunch of years ago, and he's legitimately like just one of my favorite people on earth. And his last show that he had at like Arch Enemy Arts in Philly with his partner Darla, he had this big painting, and it was like a floral bouquet with like text over it that said, "I imagine losing you all the time." And I'm telling you, standing in front of this, like, like 5 foot by 5 foot painting, just like that beautiful painting and these words on it, it was just like, it was, I can honestly say probably the only time, like in person, that a work of art has emotion moved me to tears.
Wow.
It was killer, just absolutely phenomenal.
Well, that's the power of seeing art live too, you know? It's like
Same.
one thing to see things online, it's one thing to listen to things online, it's one thing like these things are meant to be experienced in the physical realm and so yeah, I totally get that. Like, I saw some Salvador Dali stuff that was the same way. I was like, fuck.
Yeah,
Like I guess as an artist, like there's a value that we have on other artists' art. Uh,
yeah, absolutely.
whether it's because we can appreciate the difficulty or the skill that was required to make it, or we can appreciate how different it is from what we do, or
Oh,
we can appreciate how important that particular artist was to us becoming an artist. I think there's some things there that when you see these pieces in real life and you're just like it's like an artifact. You know what I mean? It's like, you know.
absolutely. No, absolutely. And it's funny too, because I've always been drawn towards like, the paintings of Caravaggio, for example, like that, like chiaroscuro, like dark black light shining through, like that has always been like what I gravitate towards. So for me, like seeing some of those pieces, I was just like, wow, like this is phenomenal. And, this is really what I just am constantly, just always making like a, beeline for Caravaggio and then like, whatever. But like, in the last 10 years or so, like looking at like Titian and Tintoretto and not even so much the paintings, but like the sketches and the studies.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny because it's just like, that is just not how I work. So looking at this is mind blowing and beautiful. And I can appreciate it so much more because it's not like my work.
Dude, that is one of those things where there are a lot of artists working even now and going back and you're, to speak directly to what you're talking about, who put so much preparation and so much work into their work before they even start painting.
Yeah.
They've done, fucking 5 paintings and like, 100 sketches. And man, I do not, I am always blown away by that because that is not me. Like, I'm like, I've got an idea. I'm going to fucking pick up a paintbrush and start doing it. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm just so spastic about that shit. And it's like, one of the things when I moved to Los Angeles and, became a professional artist, I didn't go to art school really. So I had to educate myself on a lot of stuff. And, being in LA, there's so many killer museums and like just going and you see Caravaggio or you see these and they're like fucking huge. And you're like, what? And it's like, and then on the opposite end of the scale, you get yourself in front of a Salvador Dali painting and it's tiny. And you're like, oh, this persistence of time painting that I've been looking at literally all of my life in pictures is, and then for me, it was like just the fucking sheer balls you have to paint that detail that small is like, fuck, man. Like there's, you go out to museums and like, as an artist, you're just like, wow. Like there's just, and the scale and the scope of all of the different possibilities, is amazing. Cause I'm much more of like as in a way that I work, I'm like more like a Keith Haring type of person where it's an immediate expression of whatever the thing that's inside of me is. And I want to get it done and get on to the next thing all the time. And so I definitely have a strong gravitation to pop art for that reason, like Warhol stuff and, Basquiat and work like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, my very favorite artist ever is, Rothko. I absolutely love those giant color field paintings. Like,
Those standing in front of Rothko's is a fucking feeling.
yeah. People don't understand. Like, you see people on the internet like $100 million. My kid could do that. And it's like, man, if you have never stood in front of one and you don't understand what's going on here, like I understand where you might think that, but it's not. I mean, it's fucking crazy, man.
Because most people are used to looking at a picture on their phone where it's like what 2 inches by 3 inches or whatever,
Yeah.
And that's how most people are interacting with art in like a larger cultural sense, right?
Yeah, for the last 15 years at least, yeah.
Yeah. And when you're standing in front of specifically like, a Rothko, for example, and you just see the scale and the fucking weight of those color choices. And, you're standing in front of like an 8 foot by 15 foot, or whatever painting. And you're just like, holy shit, it is oppressive.
Yeah. Well, that was the whole, that was like that was always his point, kind of like Pollock too, where it's like the point was to move the person viewing it in person. You know what I mean? Like you can't look at a Pollock picture and be like, that's just a bunch of fucking drippy paint, unless you've stood in front of a Pollock painting and you're like, holy shit, that's a lot of drippy paint. You know what I mean? It's like, and I think one of the reasons why I love like abstract work like that so much is that I'm an illustrator pretty much. Even my paintings are illustrations for the most part. And so I always was drawn to that stuff because it was so different from what I do. And then when I started painting abstracts, man, it's like the most enjoyable painting work ever. To be able to be like, well, I don't have to make this look like a thing. You know what I mean? And it's like, so I went through a phase, I don't know, like 7 or 8 years ago where it was like, that's all I wanted to do was paint abstract paintings. And then ridiculously, like I sold everything. And then I started getting commissioned like more than I've ever made for any other art to like do these paintings for people. And I was like, the fuck? And then like, I don't know, I moved on to something else and I don't know. I need to get back to it because I really, really, really love it. I love painting abstract.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, like you look at like a Gerhard Richter, right? And like you said, Pollock, though, because it's not just like the color choices or the brush strokes, or I guess in Gerhard Richter's case, a squeegee stroke,
right,
that are really, that are really doing all of the talking, right? Because when you see it in person, like you said, the buildup of that paint and the surface texture, and when you're looking at the and seeing boot prints and cigarette ashes and butts and stuck in and like those things that you can't really get from a picture online,
right, for sure,
that you need to experience in person,
especially the scale of his work. Like you could never get a picture big enough where you would see all of that small stuff like that.
Exactly.
You had mentioned that you went to art school. Where'd you go?
Yeah, so I went to Pratt Institute in Brooklyn.
Oh, okay.
And graduated in 2010.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Did you study fine art? What did you study?
So what's funny is I started as a painting major, because when I was in high school and shit, I was looking at all these painters and that's kind of what I was seeing and surrounded by, and that's what I had access to. And for the most part, you know, anybody can get some brushes and some paint and some canvas, and they can just get to work, right? And then after being in school for a year, I realized that for me at the time, painting was like pulling fucking teeth. And what I was doing in my spare time for fun, and like all hours of the day and night, was printmaking. You know, like I was screen printing, I was, you know, doing lino cuts, I was doing wood cuts. Like that's what I was. And I realized, and somebody actually said to me, they were just like, wait, like, you're not a printmaking major? And like, I had never even before, you know, I don't even remember who the fuck it was, but before they had asked that, it never even occurred to me, like, oh, this is what you're doing for fun. Maybe, you know, like maybe that's something that you should explore, you know? So I ended up switching majors and becoming a printmaking major and focusing more on screen printing and woodcut, you know. And I mean, you know, they put you through a shit ton of intaglio, you know?
Yeah.
Which I hated at the time, but now I'm like, oh, if I had access to a press, I would absolutely be working that. You know?
Dude, that's hilarious because you now are just on the list of other artists I've talked to about art school who went and started doing one thing and halfway through realized that they were like, nope, this isn't it. And it's like Isabel Samaras and Kristen K. Farrell were both like, well, I started out as a printmaker and now they're both professional painters. It's just like literally opposite of you. And then I had Sean Glaze on, who you probably know through the LA, like, and he was like, yeah, I was like doing this, like, you know, serious paintings and like all this shit. And then like, even my animation was like all serious stuff. And then at some point I realized I wanted to make my friends laugh. So I just, you know, he's like, a lot of people, I think, go into art school because you're so young and you don't, you know, you have your own idea of what it is you want to do or what it is that, what it is to be an artist. And I think people go to school and they start doing a thing and they're like, and I think the more you're exposed to different mediums, the more likely you are to find something different than what you started out in. The little bit of time that I went to art school, I studied animation and, I got accepted into the Academy of Art in San Francisco into the painting program out of high school. And then like literally when I was supposed to get ready to go, I looked at, you know, like the costs involved and I was like, even if I become a really, really good painter, am I ever going to be able to paint any of this shit back? Like I need to be more practical about this. So I kind of switched to doing animation because I was like, they're never going to stop making cartoons. You know what I mean? And it was like, and then I never worked as an animator I did in video games. That's how I got into games. But yeah, it's like, you know, but I've always wanted to be I still want to be a painter. Like painting is the most gratifying activity I do in my life ever, always, for all of my life. And I'm just not, I don't know. I wouldn't say that I'm not good enough at it. What I'd say is that you have to have a fortitude to put in the time to become an artist that can make money doing it. You know what I mean? And it's like, I just don't have, it's like the same reason I decided not to be a tattoo artist was that I didn't have time for an apprenticeship. Like I got to be making money, you know what I mean? And it's like, so I just skipped that and I don't have any tattoos. There's also that.
So what's funny is a lot of people over the years have messaged me, asked me, you know, like whatever, like, oh, do you tattoo? I want to do, can I do that? You know, can you do this? Like whatever. And it's funny because early on, I was like, yeah, like I'm going to get into tattooing. Like, this is great. Like
we all have that moment.
Exactly. Like punks and tattoos go hand in hand, right? Like that, like gnarly, you know, kind of outsider culture, you know, whatever. And it's funny because once I graduated and kind of accidentally started focusing on illustrating because I didn't really have access to presses other than like, you know, a homemade DIY screen printing setup.
Sure.
Which served me well over the years, but I was focusing more like on illustration. And once that started taking off, all of my friends that were tattooing that I probably could have hit up for apprenticeships were like, oh, well, like, you're not going to want to apprentice. Like, you got like a million shit going on all the time. Like, why would you stop and like start over and like do this thing? And now it's like at a point where I feel like I've gone like too far down the illustration like path, you know, to like turn back. And, you know, like I said, like my friends that were, you know, like tattoo artists and stuff were just like, oh, like another illustrator getting into tattooing, huh?
I got like a little bit of that too. When I started poking around, probably, I don't know, it was probably like 2012 or so. I started poking around with like, I need something else to do to supplement my income because the merch design industry the prices were tanking.
Oh,
and
yeah.
So being able to try to make, because I made a full living off of that for a number of years. And, and I was like, well, I need something else to do. Maybe tattooing is
Yeah.
And so I started poking my tattoo artist friends. I have dozens of them. Any illustrator does. And there was a lot of that, like, well, I'm not sure the industry needs another one of you. You know what I mean? And there was like and I, you know, I think I've talked about this a little bit before, and I have nothing but absolute respect for the tattoo industry or any skill or trade that has a heritage that needs to be followed. I don't, that tattooing is amazing because of that, because you have to apprentice and because you have to do all of these things if you're going to be taken seriously. But I'm way too much of a fucking anarchist to be like, okay, I'm going to follow these rules. You know what I mean? But I'm also the kind of guy who's not going to be like, fuck the rules, I'm going to do my own thing, because I have too much respect for people who did it the right way. And, you know, and it's like, cause I do have friends who were like, I'm just going to buy a tattoo gun and start tattooing my friends in my garage. And then like, you know, it's like, I mean, so, you know, it was weird. I was like, well, I guess tattooing isn't going to be what it is. And so I started airbrushing, and that airbrushed goalie mask business was interesting for me because it turned into like a full 60-hour a week business in less than a year.
And that's such a niche market.
It is definitely bigger than you think it is. It's bigger than anybody thinks it is, but it is definitely a niche. And it's funny because I got burnt on it, and I like, I'm not going to do this anymore. And I do contract work with some toy companies doing similar work. And so I kind of transitioned to doing that. And then just recently I had like a slowdown in my contract work. And I was like, I wonder if I could re-energize the goalie mask business. And I just made a post on Instagram. I was like, hey, I'm going to take 10, I got 10 slots. Who wants them? And it was like, I had like 50 people who wanted a slot. Like, we've been waiting for you to start doing this again. And I was like, oh, okay. I guess I can pay my rent this month.
Yeah, no, right? Like sometimes, you know, like that kind of like utility work is necessary. And
it is.
I have a few clients where it's the same thing. It's like, well, I don't really, all right. It's like, I know that this is going to pay. So, all right.
Yeah.
But I'm not opposed to doing this work. It's just not what I really care to focus on at this moment. But sure, it'll pay for like, you know, 4 months rent. So why not?
Yep. Got to eat. You got to fucking eat. And, you know, I've kind of, one of the things that I've learned to do, kind of just going back a little bit to what I was saying about how when I was a kid, I just pretended I was not an introvert, is I made a conscious decision to try to enjoy that type of career where I'm like, I can do all of these different things. And it's like literally today, like it was like clear coated a goalie mask, and I worked on a thing for a commercial, and I sent 2 invoices, and I'm recording a podcast. And when I'm done with this, I'm going to, you know, work on an album cover design. And it's like, I'm never fucking bored as a result of my choices. So I guess it's working out.
You know, I completely agree. Before I moved to Los Angeles, I lived in Pennsylvania, and like every room in my house was a different studio. I had my drawing, painting, illustration studio upstairs in the attic. I had a photo studio in like one of the bedrooms. The basement was my full screen printing studio. And then in my garage was where I would do, like any kind of like sculptural work. I would use it as like a spray booth, had like a photo set up in there too. Mm-hmm. And so if I had an idea for a project, it wasn't like, oh, like I got to illustrate this because that's what people expect from me. It was just like, well, no, like I have this idea for a piece and it needs to be a sculpture. So I'm going to go out back and I'm going to start working on that. And while I'm waiting for that dry, the epoxy for that to dry, I'm going to go and screen print some more patches for a show that I have coming up this weekend. And then, oh yeah, like I need to send off sketches to that band. So, like after that, like I'll go to the attic and I'll sketch that out, send it over. By that time, the epoxy will be dry and I can go down and throw a coat of paint on that sculpture. So yeah, just like never being bored, always having something to do, always just like honoring the idea that you have in whatever way it's asking to be made. And, going for it and doing it. Like, I love that shit.
Yeah, man. That's why we decided to have this life.
Exactly.
It's a weird life, but I absolutely, it's like, I didn't have any other choice, like my dad was a repo man. And so that was like my first job was like in the family business, like repossessing cars. And, I'd spent all my teen years like making art and stuff. And I knew that's what I wanted to do. So, switched over. I was not cut out to be a repo man.
No, I get it. Like when I was, it's funny, when I was younger, my friends, they were like killer skateboarders or, phenomenal, guitar players and their bands were really great. Or, I just felt like I was surrounded by all of these people that were really good at things. And they were things that I cared about, but fucking sucked at. And as much as I enjoyed them and loved them and like whatever, they just like did not come to me as easily as it did for other people.
Sure.
And the second that I started like drawing and, like writing and things like that, people were like, oh shit, like, can you do this for me? Can you do that for us? Like, and that's, it was one of those like, oh, this is the thing that kind of like more naturally comes to me. Like maybe I should, maybe I should kind of like explore this. And it was actually through like high school art teachers that were like, hey, like, what are you planning on doing like after you graduate? And I was like, I don't know, like maybe I'm vegan. So like, maybe get into nutrition. And they were just like, what the fuck? Like, I remember like my high school teacher, she was just like, you are going to be bored out of your mind. Like, what are you doing? Like, no, like, she's like, I'm not trying to tell you like one thing or another, but like, dude, like you need to be an artist. Like that is, and it's funny because I've thought about that a lot, like over the years. And now that I'm in my 30s, I'm like, man, I can't even imagine what my life would be like. Like I don't even know what that would look like.
Yeah, I'm like kind of at the point now where I've been working for myself by myself for so long. I don't even know if I could work around other people anymore. Like, I don't even know if I could do it. I could barely do it when I was in video games because I didn't fit in. I was an outsider in that culture because I never was a gamer and I don't care about any of that kind of culture, like anime or, sci-fi. None of that stuff was ever stuff that I cared about. So I was an outsider in my own profession, which was really fucking weird. So like it was hard for me. It was hard to be an outsider in an outsider's fucking world. It was really weird. Of course, I have tons of friends still from that industry, and I love everybody. I don't mean to say that I don't like everybody, but on a day basis, it was hard to go to work and relate to everybody all the time. And so like I think about it now, like every now and then I'm like, if I'm like stressed for money or something, I'm like, well, I can just like go get a job. And I'm like, I don't think you can, dude.
No, I honestly like there came a point like a bunch of years ago where I was like, should I, like there was like a, like a dip and I was like, should I do the, I really don't want to, but I'm thinking about it, like, and I just remembered, a friend of mine who's an artist. I remember when I was like really young and like just getting into like the Philly art scene. Jeremy Hush, who's a phenomenal painter, a really awesome artist. He's also worked with like a bunch of bands. He said to me one time, he was like, well, successful artists or being a successful artist is just an endurance game. And he was like, it's who, can last the longest putting up with all of the shit.
God, and that's fucking genius.
And still making the things that you want to make. Yeah. And like, when he said that to me, like I remembered it and I was just like, oh, okay. Yeah. Like whatever. And I was like, I'm going to listen to that because, like everybody in the scene is like a decade or more older than me. So I'll like listen to anything that anybody has to say. And over the years, it is, I've seen a lot of people come on and come off just as quick. And, they get tired or bored or, a variety of things. And
it's not for the faint of heart, man.
No, you really have to, and it's funny. You hear all these, oh, well, they, they just kind of blew up overnight. No, they fucking didn't. Nobody, nobody really just blows up overnight, no. There's like a decade of fucking grind,
Yeah, and then the funnier thing is like you talk to somebody who is like hot at the moment, and you're like, oh, you must be enjoying that fucking, pillowcase full of fucking cash. And it's like, they aren't.
No.
Like there are some people I've had on this show who I consider to be like fucking AAA art talents.
Yeah.
And that the rest of the world also sees them that way. And then I'm like, yeah, they fucking struggle to pay their mortgage too. And I don't feel so bad about my life.
No, right? So there are people that I know that are like fucking art stars, rock stars, like just the absolute top of the game. And it's funny because I'm like, wow, like they don't live a whole lot more comfortably than I do.
Yeah.
Like, okay. Like I was having a conversation with a friend of mine and I was like, like the whole idea of like, a band like making it, I was just like, I know motherfuckers with Grammys that have a part-time job when they're not on, you know what I mean? Like
a bunch of them.
Yeah, like a lot, right?
Yeah, like, so I have friends in some of the biggest fucking underground bands there have ever been. And they're like, they got to ask permission to go on tour from their boss. And it's like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
This is not how it's supposed to be, man.
Nah, like I have a few friends that like Billboard charters that are like really stoked on like their dispensary job, like, and like, that's, hey, that's like dope. If that's what no pun intended. If that's what you're, like, really enjoying, like, that's sick. I'm stoked for you, but this just like idea, this like myth, of making it is, it's kind of toxic, honestly.
Yeah. Well, it ties into that thing of as an artist where you're like, I don't care if you're a musician or a visual artist or any kind of person who's a creator, is there's the mythical next level that you're constantly trying to get to the next level. And they need to teach people in art school that doesn't exist. And that what you really need to do is every 2, every 5, every 7, 10 years, you need to stop and look back at where you were.
Yeah.
And notice that you have gotten to the place that you wanted to be. And most of the time you're further past where you thought, but you can never see the forest for the trees when you do what we do. You know what I mean? Cause you're just like, fuck, man. It's like, if I could just get like that one, and it's, it's just, it's all nonsense. It's a constant nonsense.
There's always a bigger project, a bigger gallery, a bigger band to work with.
Yep.
Yeah.
Always. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like my very favorite artist, you know, or my very favorite creative person of all time, Frank Kozik. Shout out
Yeah.
Kozik. You know, he
Phenomenal
he'd
artist.
he had very strong words of wisdom to me years ago, and he said, "Look, man, once I decided that all I cared about was being able to fucking make cool shit every day and not have to go work and listen to somebody else give me shit." He's like, that was the pivotal moment. I just want to keep making cool shit, and I just
Yeah.
don't want to have anybody tell me what that is. It's
Exactly.
like, yeah, you know, he kind of managed to pull that off.
No, yeah, he for sure. Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
he saw a little success, no?
yeah, you know, he's done okay for himself. I remember one time, I don't want to put too much of fucking Frank's business out in the world because you know, we are friends. And,
Yeah.
but I remember I was on the phone with him. Fuck, man, this was like probably in like 2004 or some shit. And like, he would hire me to like do stuff for him that like he needed Kozik's the name in a black metal style. So I did that for him. And so we were on the phone and I was like, well, what are you up to? And he's like, well, I just got this fucking job from this Japanese like phone company to design a logo. And he's like, it's like a 6-figure job. I'm like, whoa, dude, that must like be crazy. Like, are you like having to turn in all kinds of revisions and shit? He's like, no, it's the Japanese. It's insulting to ask for revisions. He's like, so I just did 2. He's like, it took me like an hour and I sent them and like they loved them and I got a check. I was like, I fucking hate you, dude.
Yeah. Right. Like
uh,
there were bands that I know on that went on tour in Japan, and like these like punk bands and stuff were trying to sell their shirts for pretty affordable and like whatever. And they noticed on like the first couple of dates that nobody was buying shirts, and they were like, "Oh shit! Like, are these too expensive?" And a friend of theirs was like, "No, like they're too cheap, and nobody wants to buy it because they think it's trash." They were like, "If you like quadruple the price, everybody wants to buy it because they think it's worth something." And they were like, "Wait, what?" So like they did, they upped the price and everything like sold out.
that's literally the opposite of America.
Yeah, no, the difference in culture is really interesting. When I hear stories like that, like you just said, or like that band that I was just like, whoa, it really makes you kind of step back and think about, how much of what we do is influenced by the culture that we live in.
Yeah, man. I mean, I honestly believe that every American has an obligation to go to as many different continents as they can, as often as they can, to get an understanding of what the world looks like in reality. Because we live in a culture that tells us that no other place is anywhere near as good as this one. And everybody else lives a shit existence of, oppression and poverty and like
Yeah,
unless you have gone somewhere else and done something else with your life, you can't possibly know. The most important thing I ever did was go to Mexico and go to Europe. Like,
yeah,
you're like, it's weird. It's so weird. Like, Americans need to travel and they need to see that there are other places in the world that also have freedom as much as we do, sometimes more, regardless of what you've been told.
yeah. Like sometimes a lot more.
Yeah, a lot more. Um, yeah, I
Like
don't know, man. It's a weird world. It's a
yeah,
weird world, and we live in a weird timeline.
mhm,
And
for sure.
fuck.
Yeah, like no, years ago I was privileged enough to be able to travel to Japan and Europe. I lived in Italy for a little bit and took
Oh,
classes
nice.
working out of a print shop there, and visited Uganda and Rwanda a few years
Wow.
later. And yeah, those experiences are, first of all, incredible, but it also really does expand this kind of like view of where you live, the culture that you're in, how much of your actions and thought process are a direct result of that culture. And yeah, anybody that can do it and make it happen to, like travel somewhere, do things. I agree. If you have the opportunity, absolutely go, because it really is life changing.
Yeah, because you're going to get one of two things. You're either going to learn that other places are equally awesome, or you're
Right?
going to learn to appreciate how awesome it actually is to have
Totally.
some of that stuff. Because we also, as a culture, sometimes suffer from, taking shit for granted. The fact that, it's like some people will only drink filtered water. And it's
Right.
like, you have to understand that even the worst water supply in the United States is much better than 90% of the world could ever dream to have. So,
Yeah.
calm your tits a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
It's like,
I
yeah, it's
think,
fucking trip.
yeah, you kind of realize what ideas and what you have learned you can keep, and what you can check at the door. you know,
Right.
and
Right.
and how you can grow. And also, if you are, and first of all, like, you also have to be willing and open
Absolutely.
to those changes, because some people just aren't. Even after seeing, you know, other places and other things, just still kind of have that ugly American, mentality. And it's fucking wild. There's a big world out there.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. To say it mildly. Yeah. There's definitely that. Wanted to touch on one last thing real quick before I let you go. You and I are friends with Keir Gilchrist, who
Yeah,
was a guest on this show, and we are friends with him in the real world.
yeah,
And my wife worked with him on Atypical, and she came home at the end of last season with this shirt that was this really awesome, like kind of black metal, kind of crust looking band shirt design
yeah,
of fucking penguins
yeah.
with Atypical on it. And I was like, I was like, oh, this is from Kier. And she's like, yeah, Kier got us these for our rap gift. Like, it's so rad. And I was like, God, that fucking drawing's so killer. Like, how awesome. And then like the part of me that is in every single one of us, including you, is that I was like, well, why don't you fucking get me to do it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
and I was stoked on it. And it was like, until I had booked you to be on the podcast and really started scouring through your Instagram, and then I came across that you were the person who had done this, and I like
Yeah.
went straight. And I like had told my wife, I was like, "Oh, this guy Dylan is like, his work is fucking killer. He's gonna be on the show and blah blah." And she's like, "Oh, that's great," because she helps me book people a lot of times.
Yeah.
And so I like came back in later that day, and I was like, "Oh, and he did this," and she was like, "Holy shit!" And so it was like this rad connection between all of us, and so yeah, that was awesome. And
Yeah.
so yeah,
Yeah.
my wife has one of your shirts in her shirt drawer.
Yeah. I love that. And it's funny, like, Kira is a total sweetheart.
Yeah, he's the best.
And so it was funny because I had obviously known Kier's work because of things like It Follows and United States of Era, and was a fan of those things. Um, and I saw that someone was following me on Instagram a couple of years ago, and it was a private account with, like, no profile picture. But when people follow me, like, if they have like a link in their bio and it brings you to either a Spotify thing or a Bandcamp or whatever, being that I primarily work with bands, I always check them out.
Well,
And
yeah, and you got to follow back because that's your goddamn business, and they might be business.
exactly. So when I clicked on that link, oh, my cat Mayhem is
Hey,
here.
Cato.
When he or so I clicked on the link, and as soon as I hit play for Whelm, I was just like, yo, this gnarly, grindy punk shit is absolutely everything that I love. And so I messaged him immediately and was just like, hey, just checked out your band. Really, really love it. Like I just started following you and I can't wait to hear more from y'all in the future. And that was all that I knew of this profile.
Mm-hmm.
So he messaged back and was just like, oh, like, you're one of my favorite dark artists. Like, do you think that you would want to do something for us in the future? And I was like, yeah, fuck yeah, like absolutely. So we ended up working on some designs and stuff. And after I had sent the finished design over to him, I was like, yeah, so, you're playing this show, whatever. And he was like, yeah. And I was like, oh, I wish that I could be there. But that weekend, I'm filming this short film that I wrote and I'm directing in my house. He's like, oh, that's cool. Like I work in film too. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, what do you do? And then I Googled his name and was like, oh, I'm an idiot. Like, I had no idea. Right. So I was like, I do know your work. I love you. You're great. And, we became friends and have worked on a few projects, since then. And that shirt being one of them. And I was just absolutely honored to be a part of that because I genuinely love that show.
It's so good.
And when he hit me up and was like, hey, I have this idea for a wrap gift for everybody, do you have time? Are you into that? I was like, hell yeah, let's do it. It's even just being even a little bit a part of that experience was really fucking cool.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That whole group of people, that it's like a family for us. And it was sad to see it end, but at the same time, it's gonna be more. I'm sure there's gonna be more for everybody. Well, it's a big industry that's very small, so I'm sure, And now we're connected from this the circle just keeps getting wider.
Exactly. You realize how small the circle actually is, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, for sure. All right, man. I'm going to let you go get about your day. I appreciate your time, man. It was really, really awesome to get to talk to you and get to know you better and learn a little bit about your story. And, I'll be in touch with you about, when the episode's out. I might actually just put you out next Wednesday. So just get you straight into the rotation. I will talk to you soon. And, thanks again for everything, man. I'll put links to all your stuff in the description of that episode so everybody can find you online and enjoy your awesome TikTok videos.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And we're both in LA. Let's fucking grab a coffee or something.
Yeah, for sure, man. For sure. Still, I think a little more time before that makes sense to do.
Totally.
But yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. I mean, we're about to start renovations on our house. And when we're done, there's going to be people over.
Yeah.
beginning of next year, we're going to start having people over again. So
that's a big project.
Put you on the list.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much.
All right, man. I'll talk to you soon.
Awesome.